Yeah. We had a conversation about you, matter of fact. So let's start without you. Somebody else has questions. Well, your job is done here.
Glad I showed up.
All right. We're open.
Coach, there's always this preseason challenge of some guys just being ready for preseason to be over, right, for regular games to start. What are you still trying to accomplish over these last 2 games?
Just prioritizing the execution, and continuing to lay the foundation and the groundwork of who we want to be. We know that 4 preseason games isn't going to get us to the level where we want to be, execution-wise and stylistically. We know it's going to take some time for this group to kind of gel, especially with so many guys missing so many parts of it. But the things that we can control is who we are every night we step on the floor, right? So establishing that identity of being selfless, being the most competitive team on the floor, like those things we can control. And then as, we get more and more time together, the chemistry and the talent will blend and hopefully get us to where we want to go.
One of those pieces, I guess, that you just mentioned, like trying to make things gel is Isaac Okoro. And I think you mentioned a couple weeks back just about how it's on you guys to help unlock that offensive ability that he has. In what ways have you tried to use this training camp and preseason to help do that?
Just give him a little more freedom. Again, the way we were built last year from a spacing standpoint, we put him in certain areas and kind of had him hold those areas. This year we want him to be more involved. We want him to be more attack-minded. We want him to run the floor and get more early opportunities. Convert some of his defense to offense, those types of things. So, again, staying within, his profile, but playing to the strengths of his profile.
Chris Fedor.
No. Try again, buddy.
Kelsey Reese, the Athletic. Is Evan available for play?
He is not available.
Okay. Is Dean available?
Dean is not available.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris. I guess you can go.
Chris Fedor, Cleveland.com. Generally speaking, JB, what is the importance of the pick and roll in today's NBA game?
It is the, you want to say it's almost the end-all, be-all of NBA basketball. It's the, blanking for coaches and players alike. It's where guys know that they can go to create an advantage situation. It's, it decides really whether or not guys can play later in the season, right? You've seen so many times in playoff series where guys just get played out of the series because they can't defend the pick and roll. And teams continue to find ways to put the matchup that they want in the pick and roll to create the coverage that they're looking for. So, teams are building themselves, right? Like you look at how many teams are building themselves with long, athletic, Swiss Army knife type players so that they can do more switching, and that helps eradicate some of the pick and roll problems. But then again, turns the game into an isolation game. And then, the great teams have the guys who can now win their isolation either offensively or defensively. So I think, the pick and roll is what typically unlocks, the majority of offenses.
We've seen how effective Darius and Jay can be in the pick and roll for you guys. What do you think the upside is for Donovan and Jay?
I think it's similar, to be honest with you. I think it's J.A., Evan, those guys catching the rhythm of Donovan because he and Darius don't play at the same beat. So, their role has to be timed a little bit differently. The spacing of where they roll is timed a little bit differently. So I think it's just a matter of time of that happening over and over and over again. But I expect it to be as dynamic for sure.
Have you seen signs throughout the course of training camp, the first couple of preseason games, of that chemistry between Donovan and Jay getting to the level that you want it to be?
Yeah, I think the great part about Donovan's personality is his willingness to communicate. So as plays are happening or developing during games, like you can hear Donovan talking. And even in practices, when things are done, you see him go and grab guys and be like, hey, like, try this, do that. This is what I'm thinking. This is what I like to do when the defense does that. So that's the start for us, is, their willingness and their communication. And then it's going to take reps. And then it's going to take, reps against a drop. It's going to take reps against a switch. It's going to take reps against a down, all those different coverages. And then, we'll be pretty good at it, I believe.
Thank you.
On the right now, Akron Beacon Journal, when you said they don't play at the same beat, you're talking about their speed of the game, or I just wonder what you mean.
Yeah, so like Darius typically plays at a quicker pace downhill. Donovan, at the point of attack, because of his size and physicality, he likes to engage the guard a lot, right? So now that slows the pick and roll down, and J.A. or Evan, their roll has to be a little bit slower, so they still create the same 2-on-1. So both obviously as effective, but just a little bit of a different rhythm.
Does that affect the chemistry between Darius and Donovan too?
Not as much, because what they have to now read is where they need to be spaced related to the ball. So and that's something that we work on and try to teach is, you always want to open your window for a passing lane from the guy that's in it. So it just would change, like when you would relocate to a spot, as opposed to, Darius, you probably would need to get there a little quicker. Donovan, you would wait a little bit later. So it kind of trickles down.
With Donovan and Darius, do you feel it's going to take weeks for them to hit it off, or do you?
I don't think so. It may take and it will take time for all of us to get it figured out. I think those guys are so talented that they'll find ways to score. What we have to do, again, is to find a way to have a complete offensive system. And I think that's what's more impactful. Like, Donovan and Darius on their own, could go out and get 25 to 30, but how does that impact everybody else? And I think that's the thing that, is going to take us some time. And just takes game reps at game speed to do it.
Have you settled on Karras?
I have not yet. But I will say this, and I want to make sure that I say this publicly. He has done everything right to earn the spot. Again, whatever decision we make at the beginning of the year, I always hold the card to pull it back if we need to make an adjustment. But he has done everything to earn that spot.
So what else? Well, I guess I'd say, what else do you need to see? And then half the guys you named when I asked a couple weeks ago, they're hurt.
Right. That makes it, right, obviously makes it tough. Those guys that we named, we do have a history with, and what we want to figure out, and, again, change is always a possibility, but we have to make sure all the pairings are right? And we have to make sure that all our rotations work. So if Karras is at your starting three, like what does your bench look like? When do the subs come? We're trying to make it so that we can keep 3 of our top 6 on the floor at all times, because we feel like that gives us an advantage in second units. So we kind of just have to work through all those things about how we will get that done.
2 more ideas on this. And the first one is, if you take a step back and look at your team and try to figure out the bench, like Karras, he's a scorer, he can handle it. And so you might say he's an obvious 6-man. But you've also said that you want to stagger Darius and Donovan. Does doing that make it easier to start Karras?
It depends on, but it depends on who you would come off the bench with, right? Or who you would sub in for that starting spot for him. There's always ways through rotations where in a first quarter, you end up with a second and a third unit as opposed to just a typical second unit by making that early substitution, right? So there is a way to start Karras, bring in somebody early for him and then bring him back with what would end up being your third unit, where he could be more of a focal point because Donovan or Darius wouldn't be in that group depending on how you went with your rotation.
You keep mentioning that you could always pull this card back. But I think last year, either you didn't show the big lineup at all until game 1, or maybe it was the end of preseason. But so I guess you could do that again.
Yeah, the good thing about it is I can do what I want.
Thank you, Joe. Mark from The Athletic. Brendan.
Brendan Gulick, Cavs Insider, Sports Illustrated Media Group. Maybe a slightly bigger picture question. We had talked with Karis and with Darius post-game, and they both referenced the amount of time between preseason game 1 and game 2, and referenced they were going to have similar, off time, quote unquote, between game 4 and then the first game of the regular season. Are you happy with the way that you guys handled that layoff, and will you do anything different when you have that coming up?
I mean, we will do something different just because it is a game that counts. So we will handle it a little bit differently. How we were preparing guys as far as conditioning and their legs and all those things over that break was a little bit different than we'll do it, as we prepare for Toronto. Having more time to spend on Toronto instead of, that preseason time where our focus is on ourselves. So our preparation will look a little bit different as well.
And just one question about Howell Neto. What do you want to see from him here in these last 2 preseason games?
I think, his history and what he's done so far, we know who he is. He's a guy who, can steady the ship. He's a guy who can organize. He's a guy who can get in the paint, create for himself, create for others. He plays with a natural grit and toughness on both ends of the ball that, we appreciate here. He's a guy that his teammates want to play with. So I think we have a pretty clear understanding of who he is.
Last one. Kevin.
Evan Damer on Meta Bulletin. JD, is Kevin available tonight?
Kevin is not available tonight.
And also, you've used Donovan in the first 2 season games so far as your pseudo point guard with your bench unit. Have you been pleased with those results so far? And is it just something you want to keep exploring, or maybe look at other options with just the 2 games you have left?
Again, in our quest, I guess, to kind of keep those guys staggered, it is a conversation, and we know what he's capable of, as running the show and creating, not only for himself, but like when the ball is in his hand, how dynamic he can be, and not always needing a setup guy to get him, the ball and put him in scoring opportunities. When he's coming up the floor and there's 10 eyes on him, that also is going to create some other things for other people as well. So, again, we believe in how we believe how he will play for us. At some point guard with those guys, but I think that Donovan can easily handle those responsibilities as a point guard as well.
All right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Available in the
But you don't have to ask me